Death Note is an anime so good that it's worth talking about 16 years later after release. There are so many interesting, intricate, different ideas and topics that are covered throughout the anime that it took me a pretty long time to even settle on an idea. But that's okay because I have a couple of more batches of different Death Note content coming out. So if you guys like this video, be sure to stick around for the next Death Note anime video. In this video specifically, we are going to be covering essentially the entire subplot, or rather, the entire example of what Death Note symbolizes: life, death, and the shinigami. A concept so thrilling and breathtaking that it's good enough to keep people talking about it 16 years later. I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get straight into it. It's the year 2007. Tsugumi Oba, along with Takashi Obata, two respected Japanese artists, decided to co-create a manga series, which was the inevitable birth of the manga and anime series that we know and love today, known as Death Note. I bring this up because the authors specifically stated that when creating the show, they wanted to leave the perception of whether or not the actions taken throughout the manga and anime are right and wrong to the perceiver of whoever is reading the subcontext. In other words, to say that they wanted to leave it up to imagination or the readers, and they wanted the reader to specifically have their own imagination on whether or not using the Death Note or the strategies of said policemen are actually morally right or wrong. Doing this forces the reader to put themselves in the situation or in the universe and decide whether or not the actions themselves are right, wrong, and the context on how people within this universe even view morality to begin with. Life symbolizing light Yagami, death symbolizing L, and the shinigami, of course, symbolizing Ryuk. We'll start with dissecting the life aspect of Death Note, or rather starting off with Light Yagami himself. Light views himself as the god of the New World, seeing as though he received a death note in which he can write people's names in, killing them almost instantly or at any time which he desires. Light is life because of the fact that not only does his name symbolize light, being the life of the continual aspect of life, death, the circle of light, all types of symbolisms, again from Tsugumi Oba, the writer of Death Note, but also due to the fact that in Light having the real life aspect of a Death Note, he literally has people's lives in his hands. He gets to personally decide whether or not someone gets to live 100 years, 20 days, or 5 more minutes. And that is why he himself is the purest aspect of life in the entire manga and anime. Now, whether or not Light's actions are just or not is the responsibility for another video, but I do want to touch on the fact that Light had good intentions and the reason for why he decided to put people's lives in his hands. We start out when the beginning of the show shows us that Light views the world as rotten. He simply thinks that it needs to be fixed due to the fact that in his current life, mostly through the news and due to the fact that his father is indeed a police officer, he hears nothing but the crimes and massive atrocities being committed by different mass criminals and murderers. Light hasn't really had the opportunity to realize that there's a lot of good in the world too, but when you live in the household where your family is mostly watching the news and your father comes home looking drastically tired and with nothing but bad news on the latest murder case, then of course your views might also eventually be viewed that the world is simply ugly, rotten, and needs to be fixed. The only difference is that Light was given a tool to fix this version of the world that he viewed, and even though it might have even arguably have been childish, some might say, it still was a noble and yet refined goal for someone who could have used the Death Note to do a lot worse, take over entire governments, force the president to roll down to his whims, hit the lotto. I mean, there's millions of different ways that he could have used the Death Note, and yet he chose to use it to try and clean up the world for the best way he possibly could, so that honest and hardworking people could live in a society where they don't have to look over their shoulder. Eventually, he does get corrupted later on in the show and manga, as we do see, but his initial goal was indeed noble, and this is non-subjective. You can argue that Light cared about life so much that he was willing to take it. As he stated when he was eventually caught, all egotism aside, he was probably one of the only people who were willing to go that far and were willing to actually go through with the initial plan, all with the inevitable sacrifice of his own soul and body. He actually values life enough to take it. And although that might sound a bit controversial, I mean, think about it. He thought and believed that if you were an honest and hardworking person in society, that you genuinely should not have anything to worry about. And anyone who would oppose this via a raper, killer, or thief, robber, anything of the sort, should be condemned to death or taken from the planet and deleted.
Delete! Delete! Delete!
But all jokes aside, Light genuinely does seem to be one of the only people in the Death Note show who actually cared about society as a whole and cared about the current state of what was going on, which inevitably, in the current reality of said Death Note, was endangering people's lives, honest and hard-working people's lives, which is why he once again decided to write names in the Death Note and be the one who would inevitably take on the struggle of being the new god of the new world. I'm not saying that I 100% approve of Kira or anything he was doing for the matter. I mean, it was only up until episode 2 where he was ready to write down an innocent person's name just for opposing him in public and challenging him because he thought he was L. But the fact of the matter is, there does seem to be a rampant crime race in the universe of Death Note, and Light just wanted to be the person to erase this problem. But even with all the power of life in his hands, he still had a huge problem. He's only human. Light is not a shinigami, a god, nor an omnipotent being. He was simply a person with way too much power and way in over his head. He's the perfect example of a character who has the right idea but is wrongly executed because of lack of maturity or thereof experience of the real world. Light is so intelligent that he is stated to be bored, and yet he's not mature enough to realize that the idea that he has of this perfect world simply cannot exist, or if it is to exist, that he cannot view himself as God, and that as a human being or as the light of the world, that he has to lower himself on the same playing field as the people that he is trying to save. Not a god, but simply a servant to the people himself, but instead he views people as a servant to him. And we see this throughout the anime and manga while he manipulates friends, families, lovers, and people who would lay down their lives without a second thought to protect and shield him from any accusations of him being Kira, or even his own followers of people who were willing to do his bidding to help support his notions as Kira. He simply disregards these people's lives and uses them as nothing more than tools. And even though he did use most of everybody around him as tools until the end, which was his ultimate downfall as Kira, I also do believe that he did still provide some level of life and existence to these people who were following his notions and his will. Misa explained her backstory. When Light finally punished this man, Misa immediately fell in love with him and decided to follow him. Misa is seen doing model work and other things of the like throughout the anime, but she never really seems to have any actual affinity for it, meaning that she never really seems to take interest in it and is something she's simply doing to either gather income to support herself or doing it just because. She has the look of someone who doesn't exactly know why they're alive. She looks as though she doesn't understand her existence and that the death of her parents really scarred her emotional and mental state as a human being. But with Kira around, with Light giving her purpose, he finally gave her life and a light to her life and something outside of the darkness that she has been going through for a lot of the period in her lifetime. Mikami is also another one of Kira's followers that we see later on, who also seems to be a bit quirky, following the same exact mundane schedule, having zero to no purpose and dead inside, looking for some sort of excitement or a reason to exist, which is why he immediately latches onto Kira the second that God, as he calls him, decides that he actually has a purpose in this world. He immediately latches onto the idea that he was called upon by some deity who has the power of the Death Note to finally actually be of use within the world. Otherwise, he's just a mundane lawyer who goes to the gym on Mondays for an hour and has the same mundane 9 to 5 schedule. I say all this to say that even though Light did manipulate the people around him, and he did do it in a negative light, again, something that I don't approve of, he did still give these people life, if you will. Because without Light Yagami, or Kira for these matters, these people might still be alive, but they would still be living the mundane, nonsensical lives of purposeless behavior, leaving them unsatisfied and empty. It doesn't matter how you interpret it. The simple matter of the fact is that Light did actually use these people, and even though he used them in a negative light, he did notice that their lives were empty, and he wanted to make them useful and bring light into their lives. Furthermore, showing that Light actually cares about the lives of people, despite him later on being corrupted by the Death Note. Unlike his counterforce of L, who for many reasons or another is actually portrayed to be
No reason to act surprised. I am the Shinigami Ryuk. That used to be my notebook.
Ryuk has his own personality, and he is a Shinigami through and through, but he's also a visual representation of what it's like for us viewers to witness what is happening in the Death Note universe. I believe Sugemo Oba wanted a visual representation of something to follow Light, something of a spectator like us watching from his side to see exactly what happens next through this epic game of cat and mouse. Ryuk is probably one of the best written characters in Death Note since he doesn't sway any notions or change at any slight of bit throughout the entire anime and or manga. Just like Light and L, Ryuk was bored of the Shinigami realm, bored of the rotten apples, and bored of just sitting there waiting for something interesting to happen. So he threw the Death Note down to the human realm to see if somebody interesting would pick it up, and luckily for him, it just so happened to be Light, someone with a similar mindset. Throughout this video so far, I've covered the concepts of life and death, and Ryuk has no regard for either or side of this coin. He's a Shinigami. He understands the concept of life and how important it is for himself to continue to live as well as others around him. But he also does not care about the concept of death, allowing anybody who picks up the Death Note to write down other users simply for his own entertainment and joy. Ryuk is the ultimate spectator, someone who's doing all this simply out of boredom. But unlike L and Light, he has zero stakes in this game. As he's told Light many times over, he's simply a spectator, someone in a movie theater waiting for something interesting to happen. Ryuk also stated that even though he is following Light around to see what he does with the Death Note, he's not particularly on his side or Kira's. He has no interest in interfering to help Kira, allow him to borrow his Shinigami Eye, or allow him to escape from L or any of the police around him. The only time Ryuk ever helps Light is because it's his own benefit to do so, because things would then get more tense and more interesting for him to enjoy. And that's why Ryuk is the perfect middle ground for Death Note. He doesn't have a side. He perfectly cooperates with L when he asks as many questions to Ryuk as possible, and he stays true to his word that he's not there to help Light. He's not friends, they're simply roommates, and he's simply a spectator who's there to see what happens. This is shown when Light also gets caught and near asks Ryuk questions, and he responds carefreeingly as if there is no line to be crossed, and he simply doesn't really care. Now, yes, he does seem to take a liking to Light whenever he gives him apples, but that's usually for a short time of being. Something like a snack for him, or if anything, that only incentivized him to work with Light, but outside of that, it's still a work-like relationship. They work in the same environment, but nothing more than that. They both get something that Ryuk gets endless entertainment and he gets rid of his boredom, and Light gets to realize his goals as God and provide Ryuk with any entertainment by cleaning up the world with any criminal scumbags that are around. This format that Death Note kept between these three characters is extremely interesting, and it's something that I thought was definitely worth diving into. Light being life has always been something that I thought was the blatant symbol on Death Note through various different visual art and things of that nature, and L being symbolized as death or not really alive, also through many of his symbolisms and clips throughout the anime that I thought were particularly made obvious in that context. And then there's Ryuk, the man who's in the middle ground, who understands both the consequences of being a god and being a normal mundane human being, someone who understands the consequences between light and death and chooses not to interfere with either. We see Ryuk not care when Light tricks a woman into giving her life up by forfeit, literally standing there dying of laughter next to Light. I'm still not sure how he kept a straight face, but nonetheless, he does so, laughing at the fact that this woman has forfeited her life without realizing it. And then there's other times where he's a little bit more serious and sincere when it comes to negotiating something that would benefit him, which is the Shinigami Eye deal, cutting Light's lifespan in half in order to benefit himself, giving him some more years to his Shinigami life. The concepts of life and death playing off of each other, the massive symbolisms. The context of Death Note is endless, and it's all on purpose due to the masterful act from Sugami to allow the reader to decide whether or not something means something or nothing at all. Would you be active or would you be on the sidelines? Do you think Light is right or wrong? Do you think L is right or wrong? Or would you be like Ryuk and just spectate in the sidelines? At the end of the day, it's a masterpiece through and through. And 16 years later, I still can't get enough of Ryuk's laugh. I appreciate you guys for watching this perspective video. It's been quite a while since I've done these, and I'm trying to improve my perspective analysis video techniques, so I definitely would appreciate any feedback you guys could give me. More Death Note videos coming soon, and along with the concept of death and life, I'm going to be releasing other subsequent videos along with these topics. If you guys would like to see more, happily leave a like, comment, and or subscribe. Leave any suggestions for any other further anime that may be like Death Note, or maybe that you would like to see me review or do a psychological review on. I appreciate you guys as always. I'll see you guys on the next one. This is 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐿. Laters.